I'll walk on in like any other day and, holler for mom and nothing, no sound. Anyway, look around, she's not there. Everything is there, the car, clothes, purse. That's it, nothing, and she was gone, vanished. And when I saw everything was there, including her car and keys and purse, that's when I started getting a little concerned. Kind of knew in the back of my head that this person she was involved with, I kind of, even as a young kid, I had not a great fuzzy feeling about it. I thought he was up to just trouble. I guess my young intuition was right, because she's still gone.
Hey crime babes, welcome to Crimes with Catherine, where we delve into the chilling depths of true crime and expose tales of deceit, betrayal, and mystery. As always, I strive to honor all the victims that we discuss here. I'm your host, Catherine, and I thank you so much for watching. If you are listening to the podcast, thank you so much for tuning in as well. If you want to be a crime babe and never miss an episode, please remember to hit that subscribe button. Today's case has taken me on quite an emotional journey. While every case I cover is important, this one has personally affected me. I had the unique opportunity to meet with some of the victims' family members. Before we get into the details of this case, I want to give a quick trigger warning. I will be addressing sensitive topics related to racism, drug use, and generalized trauma from losing a loved one. So please practice self-care when listening to this episode. We're going to be talking about the disappearance of Ann Taylor Dorminey. This case isn't well known, and I am so honored that I get to bring you this story today. I have to warn you, this truly is a mystery, and there are a lot of unknowns about this story. It might leave you feeling frustrated. I will do my best to cover every detail that I learned from the family and other research. Ann was a 30-year-old single mother at the time of her disappearance. On October 3rd, 1981, she seemingly vanished from her home and to this day has not been seen since. As with many cold cases that are unsolved, the years drag on and the cases are slowly forgotten about. This case, being 40 years old, has the potential to be pushed to the wayside, and ultimately, I do not want this case to be forgotten. I stumbled onto this story while having a chance conversation with my dad. My dad and I were passing through his hometown of Adel, Georgia, and for old time's sake, drove by his childhood home. I also grew up visiting my grandparents at this home. He pulled up to my grandparents' former house that day and pointed across the street to a vacant, overgrown lot. He asked me if I remembered the neighbor's house that used to be there. I did remember the house because it had a distinctive yellow brick wall surrounding the property. My dad told me that before the house was torn down due to roofing issues, the Taylor family lived there. He and the daughters in that family were roughly the same age. He remembered them as being very beautiful, and he had a little boyhood crush on them. Well, that was a sweet memory, but then he went on to tell me after he grew up and moved away, the younger sister went missing sometime in the 70s or 80s, but he couldn't remember the exact details. Naturally, I immediately Googled the name of the neighbor girl, and I found what seemed to be discrepancies in the reports online. While there are 2 sites that list her as a missing person, there is quite a dispute in the comment section on whether the dates are accurate or not. The sites are confusing and seem to be reporting inaccurate information. Something inside of me wanted to know the real story about this young woman who vanished and what happened to her. I believe that every victim's memory is worth honoring and every story worth telling. I tried to get her case file through a FOIA request, but was unable since it is considered an open case. I was able to contact the detective currently assigned to Ann's case from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. He let me know that there are relatives of the victim out there, but of course could not provide me their names. He encouraged me to go to the internet, which I did, but I had no luck. So I called the detective back and pretty much begged him to be the middleman between me and the family. He had told me they periodically check in with him and vice versa. Now, I don't know if he wants me to mention him by name or not, so I'm not going to, but I want to give a shout out to him just in case he comes across my episode. I really do appreciate all of his help in this research that I was doing. I was very persistent and he was very helpful, so thank you so much to that special detective. I hope this episode will bring a fresh focus and maybe a closer look at this case. I honestly did not expect to hear from any of the family members when I asked the detective to pass along my number. I told myself I would wait 2 weeks and then I was going to pester the detective again. But later that same day, I was shocked when I received a call from the missing woman's son, Wade Dorminey. Wade is 51 years old now at the time of recording this episode, but he was just a young 11-year-old boy when his mother vanished. A discrepancy online reports him as 3 or 4 years old, but he was in fact 11. I cannot put into words how honored I am that he took a chance with a total stranger and was willing to talk to me about his mother. I expressed to him my desire to highlight her case on an episode and report the correct information. I also shared with him that I too have an unsolved crime in my family. I can relate to the feelings of frustration that come with not knowing what happened to your loved one. I do cover my Aunt Ruby's unsolved mystery from 1963 in my first 3 episodes if anyone is interested in learning more about the mysterious case of Ruby Stapleton. Wade shared his memory of his mother's disappearance over the phone with me that day and then also got in touch with his Uncle Jim, who is Ann's brother. A few weeks later, I traveled to Adel, Georgia, where I sat down with Wade and Jim. They shared memories and photos with me of their mother and sister. In the background of one of these images, you can see a glimpse of the yellow brick wall I remembered around their house. I just want to say, I know it was hard bringing these memories up to the surface and opening up old wounds. It's a wound you carry your whole life, but sometimes life gets busy and it's easier to bury that wound. All of a sudden, I entered their lives, causing them to revisit that trauma, and I just really appreciate their openness and kindness towards me. Hearing from Mr. Dorminey that day on the phone confirmed in me that this case does need to be brought out into the public eye because the family still cares. They want to know what happened to their beloved family member and deserves justice. Let's dig right into this case and talk about who was Ann Taylor. Ann Taylor was 5 foot 3 inches tall, weighed about 115 pounds, and had long, shiny, light brown or strawberry blonde hair. She was a very beautiful woman. In fact, one of the first things Wade asked me over the phone was had I seen a picture of his mother online. I said, yes, she could have been a model. And he agreed that she was very, very beautiful. I think it was so sweet of Wade to want it known, hey, my mom was gorgeous. I have 2 sons myself, and it melts my heart when they compliment me in some way. I know as a mother, Ann would be so touched that he wanted that known about her. This picture shows Ann with her son Wade and her brother Jim celebrating her birthday, if I remember correctly. This photo couldn't have been taken too long before she disappeared because Ann's birthday is in September and she vanished in October. They look so happy. She is just smiling so big. And look at those cheekbones. She was an absolute beauty. So beautiful Ann Elizabeth Taylor was born on September 18th, 1951 to Bob and Dalpha Taylor. She had 1 older sister and 3 younger brothers. As I mentioned before, she lived across from my dad's family roughly in the 70s in the small town of Adel, Georgia. Her family's home, with the infamous to me yellow brick wall, you could say was every child's ideal place to call home. There was a small putting green in the backyard, along with a really cool gazebo and also a fairly large playhouse for the kids. The perfect setting to raise a big family. Ann's father was a local businessman and also had a pilot's license. He went on many adventures as a pilot, even taking his son on trips to Nicaragua. Ann's mother made her living and spent her time being a talented artist. In fact, she would design and make the backdrops for her children's school programs. She was described as a very hands-on mother, being in the PTA and running concessions. She was a very present parent in her children's lives in their small community of Adel, Georgia. An interesting fact about Adel is that it used to be called Puddleville because of the puddles that would form after rainstorms before the streets became paved. Rumor has it that the first postmaster caught a glimpse of the name Philadelphia on a croaker sack. Now, I had to Google this because I didn't know what a croaker sack was. I assumed it was like a mail bag, but it was actually a burlap feed sack. I guess that's well known in the South, but I did not know that. So the mail carrier seized this name on a croaker sack and wanted to change Puddleville's name to something that sounded a bit more distinguished. The town leaders decided on the name Adel, which were 4 letters taken from the name Philadelphia. I have visited Adel all of my life and had no idea of the interesting origin of the name. Adel, Georgia today is roughly about 5,000 people and still has the same small town feel that it did in the 1980s. Ann went to high school at Cook County High there in Adel and seemed to inherit some of her mother's artistic or creative side. She was the first female drummer in the marching band of her high school. That's really cool that she was in the drum corps. Here is a picture of Ann when I believe she was a young freshman at her high school. Ann graduated high school in 1969. When Ann was 18, she got an unexpected surprise. She was to have her first and only child in the early spring of 1970. Ann had her child a son she named Wade Marshall Dorminey. Ann and Dennis Dorminey, Wade's father, were married for a short period of time, but the marriage didn't last long. Then, tragically, Dennis Dorminey was killed in a car accident in 1972. Wade was just barely 2 years old. Ann had the task of raising her son as a single mother, and that's just what she did. She relocated to Valdosta, Georgia, where many people from Adel and the surrounding areas commute to. Valdosta is about 30 minutes from Adel and was considered the hub of the area. Growing up, I would visit my dad's family farm during Thanksgiving near Valdosta, and then we would all head to Valdosta for shopping and going to the movies. Valdosta offered big city living with more job opportunities for Ann, and she may have been a little restless in her hometown of Adel, where everyone knows everybody, and here she is, a young, newly single mother. Maybe she was just trying to carve out a little place in the world for herself that she could call her own for her and her son. She found a job as a waitress, and over the years, she worked as a waitress and a bartender at various places around Valdosta. At the time of her disappearance, she lived in a modest home at 206.5 West Mary Street, and from what I learned from Wade, her home was kind of tucked away behind another property, which might be important in her disappearance. I'll expand on that in a bit. Her brother Jim remembers coming to visit her in Valdosta at different times, where he would stop by her work and have a drink with her at the bar while she was on her shift. They were a very close family. Of course, everyone rallied around young Wade as he was growing. Wade attended elementary school in Valdosta, but spent many of his weekends and summers back in Adel with his grandparents, the Dormineys and the Taylors. He remembers the house fondly with the yellow brick walls, saying it was one of his favorite places to visit. Life was just moving along for Wade and his mother Ann in 1981. When I sat down with Wade and his Uncle Jim there at the library in Adel, they shared with me that Ann would be considered the cool mom. She liked to have a good time, but she was also very predictable and very responsible. This is why when Wade came home from a weekend trip to his grandparents and found his mother gone, he immediately knew something was wrong. This was not like Ann to leave and not tell anyone where she was going, especially since she knew her son was coming home that day. She was always there to greet him. So as I mentioned, Wade had stayed the night before at his grandparents in Adel, and when his grandmother brought him back to Valdosta on that Saturday, October 3rd, they saw that his mother's belongings were there, but she was not. Her purse, keys, and car were found at the house. This appeared alarming and suspicious. This, to me, would be like someone leaving their cell phone behind in today's time. I never leave the house without my phone, and I imagine the presence of Ann's purse would immediately raise suspicions, because even if she was picked up by a friend, she would have taken her purse as you or I would take our phones with us. Wade said he walked through the home calling for her, thinking, okay, she can't be too far because this is a small house, but she did not answer. Wade shared with me that while looking throughout the house, he came to the bathroom and remembers this feeling of dread when he saw the closed shower curtain. He said he did not want to open that shower curtain because of what he might find. I'm sure all kinds of thoughts were running through his young mind, and the possibility that she had fallen and had an accident was a valid concern. My heart just goes out to this man at how traumatic all of this must have been, and what a burden he still must carry in his heart all these years later, not having any answers. So as we know, Ann was not found anywhere on the property, so Ann's mother instinctively called the police. Wade remembers not just one, but several police coming to his house that day to take the report. When police canvassed the neighborhood, they took a statement from a woman that lived right next door to Ann and Wade. She stated she saw a vehicle at Ann's house twice on the evening in question. The family seems to remember that the vehicle was a van. The woman claimed she saw the van arrive sometime around Friday evening, and then again possibly around 1 or 2 a.m. Saturday morning. The neighbor's house was located in front of Ann's house, with the driveway to Ann's home directly passing the woman's. The neighbor claimed this was how she knew the van came back a second time. She looked out her window upon hearing a car pull along the drive. The police tracked down the owner of this vehicle and questioned him. He was a friend of Ann's, and he stated that he did go to Ann's residence that night, but once he dropped her off, he claimed he did not go back a second time. I want to mention that in one of the reports online, it was possibly inaccurately reported that there was a broken window in the home. The report correctly lists the belongings found in the home, but then says there was a window broken from the inside out. I asked Wade about that, and he said to his knowledge he did not know of any broken windows. If for some reason the window was broken from the inside out, as a report online says, it must not have been that significant because Wade nor his uncle don't remember hearing anything about that. Now, if it was broken, that could be seen as evidence of a struggle, but it was noted by Wade that from what he recalls, the home was in good order. There were no obvious signs of a struggle, no tables or chairs tipped over, no drawers ransacked, nothing of that nature. Everything appeared the way it normally did, other than the fact that his mother was not there. So the report of the window being broken from the inside out is just another confusing part of this case because I don't know where that information came from that was reported online. Unfortunately, not much is known about Ann's last day and the hours leading up to her disappearance. We don't really have a clear picture of what she was doing or where she was going. Without these key details, it is very hard to put a timeline together. Wade relayed to me that his mother worked almost every day at the restaurant bar she was employed through, so we can assume that she most likely worked a shift and then appeared to have made it home Friday evening. Obviously, she dropped off her belongings at some point, and then sometime between the late evening and early morning hours on October 3rd, she disappeared. I want to talk about Ann's friend now, who admitted being with her on the night of her disappearance. In protecting the rights and privacy of individuals, and since this is considered an active and open case, we will call Ann's friend with the van Rocky. This is where it gets interesting. Rocky was a skilled guitarist and was thought to have contributed to a popular song that was released in 1981 by a very famous musician. Without a doubt, Rocky was well known in the music circles of that time. And I did a little research, aka stalking, on Rocky's socials, and I saw different posts where he was in fact playing the guitar in recent years. I want to mention this next information because sometimes the smallest detail can crack a case. We know people in the music world can sometimes get sucked into other things. Sometimes rock and roll goes hand in hand with partying. And speaking with Wade and his Uncle Jim, I learned Rocky had a reputation of being heavily involved in the drug scene. Of course, we don't know how deep his involvement was and what other things might have been going on with his personal life, but Wade, being a child at the time, felt that Rocky's association with this crowd he was in probably was not on the up and up. Wade remembers a feeling of distaste for his mom's friend. He also remembers being driven around with his mother in a fancy car with a driver. It sounded like Rocky was kind of living the high life of someone flaunting their wealth. It appears that Rocky had at least two vehicles, one being the alleged van, which was possibly shared by him and his ex-wife, who he was living with at the time of Ann's disappearance. And then he had this other fancy car with a driver. I did some research and found out that Rocky actually ran a type of car service, like maybe a limousine service, but I could not find enough information as to the exact dates he was employed through the car company, and he also could have been the owner of the company. I'm just not sure. There's incomplete information online. I wondered if a car used for this car service was what Wade remembered. There's not much information, so I could be mistaken, and this could be a business that he started later in life. I just want to provide all the information that I came across. The unknowns and theories in Ann's disappearance are endless. In a crime with so many unanswered questions, it is natural for one to speculate, and every theory needs to be investigated. The most talked about theory is regarding Ann's male suitor at the time, Rocky. While we don't know much about the last moments Rocky spent with Ann, we do know that by his own admission, he had been at her home on the evening in question. Because of Rocky's involvement with the party scene, Ann's family questioned if she somehow got involved with that. It's noticed by her brother Jim that Rocky seemed to do a little harder partying than what Ann was known to do. The family speculated that Ann realized this was not a road she wanted to go down and was trying to end things with Rocky. Maybe Rocky felt threatened, like he couldn't trust Ann anymore. So many scenarios run through my mind. Did he get angry at her for possibly calling him out on his habits? Was he a jealous type that could have been triggered that night by an unknown event and caused Ann harm? She was a very beautiful girl and would have had a lot of men vying for her attention. Did Rocky and Ann get into an altercation that led to her disappearance? There has also been idle speculation over the years, nothing concrete of course, but some have presented the idea that Ann was trafficked out of the country, which alludes to Rocky being involved with more than the party scene and limousine service. Was he involved in something more sinister? In a case like this, tongues will always be wagging, but it is important to look at every angle. Rocky may be completely innocent, but I do know that often the last known contact of a missing person is very much investigated. The questions and possible motives are endless. Another possible motive behind Ann's disappearance is the theory of a racially motivated hate crime. Rocky was a man of color and Ann was a white woman. Did Ann and Rocky's interracial romance bring unwarranted aggression from someone angered by their relationship? We have to remember this was the early 1980s in the Deep South, and a lot of people were still struggling with acceptance, unfortunately. And I say romance because Wade refers to the time Ann spent with Rocky on that night as a date. Another piece of information Wade and Jim shared with me made my ears perk up slightly. Ann had a wealthy, white male friend she had been friends with for years. And while I was speaking to Ann's family, I wondered if he may have wanted more than friendship. Again, she was very attractive and desirable. Could this friend have been upset by the fact that she chose to stay with a man of color instead of choosing him? Even if that aspect was true, was that motive enough for him to harm her? This was just speculation on my part, but I wonder if this friend was ever interviewed by police and what information he could or did provide. There is one more theory that of course needs to be considered: a crime of opportunity. Ann worked many late nights and unknowingly could have been followed and later abducted. We know through Ann's brother Jim that at different times Ann worked at the Rum Keg Bar, Plantation House, and she had worked at the Howard Johnson Hotel Bar and Restaurant. She saw many customers. Could a guest have had his eye on her and followed her home to take advantage of her? This scenario makes me think of a personal story. My daughter was a hotel clerk for the late shift a while back, and there were many nights she was hit on by creepy men, as she would call them. She even started wearing a fake diamond ring on her left hand in hopes that men would think she was married and would stop trying to flirt with her at check-in. Although that didn't deter too many men, unfortunately. But she also didn't feel comfortable walking to her car by herself after her shift. She would ask a coworker or myself or her dad to accompany her to her car. So many late nights we would drive across town just to walk her to her car. The things you do for your children. It isn't unthinkable that a creepy patron could have had his eye on beautiful Ann. When I mentioned before about Ann's house being set back from the other properties, I was wondering if it was secluded enough for someone to get to her house undetected and abduct her. But there was that house in front of hers that the woman lived in and could see and hear cars going back and forth to Ann's. That may not be as plausible as I thought, but something to think about. If a person parked on the street and walked down the path undetected, could they have lured her to their car on the street? So many possibilities. These theories are all plausible, but as of today, none have been proven one way or another. This case is frustrating because we are assuming something terrible happened to Ann, but without knowing where she is, we can't say what, and the family has no answers. Let's go over again what we know. She appears to have made it home after her shift at work and going out with Rocky by the presence of her belongings. Sometime after her date, she disappeared. It was reported online that she was on her way to the grocery store, but the family could not confirm that detail. It appears more likely that she would have been abducted from her home because her car and belongings were left behind. What we also know is that the evidence points to her possibly knowing the person that caused her disappearance, because there were no signs of a struggle or forced entry at her home. Now, I have to present the idea that Ann left on her own and started a whole new life and is out there living under an alias. But that is highly, highly unlikely. It is pretty much clear that Ann did not disappear by her own will. She would not have left her son. There is also the possibility that Ann is alive and being held against her will. We have all read stories of victims being abducted and found years later. Wade shared with me an age-progressed photo that I want to share with all of you. Again, anything is possible. Over the years, the police have investigated her former suitor Rocky thoroughly and have been in communication with him about this case as recently as just a couple years ago. He has gained for himself quite a rap sheet over the years, and if he does know something about this case, my hope would be that he will come forward. Rocky is getting older in years, as well as many of Ann's former acquaintances. As time goes by, it is less likely this case will be solved, but not impossible. There's always the hope that this episode might give someone the courage to speak out after all these years if they know something that could potentially help solve this mystery. You can call the GBI with any tips, and you can remain anonymous. The detective assigned to this case said he appreciated me calling and inquiring about this case, and that they welcome tips from internet sleuths all the time. It's not unheard of for regular citizens to help solve a crime. In fact, the detective also told me that someone had previously called in about unidentified remains remains that were listed on doenetwork.org that had an eerily similar description to Ann. The detective shared with me they were possibly in the process of comparing dental records. Now, I did just find out that they have identified those remains as a Patricia Howard. I read briefly about her case and am heartbroken for her family. I will be doing more research as this case is seemingly unsolved at the time of this recording. But that just shows you that law enforcement takes all leads into consideration. In conclusion to this episode, I want to add that the stories of grief, courage, and resilience that come after a disappearance such as Ann's deserve their own spotlight. I have to say that witnessing firsthand what crime does to a family, I am encouraged by the survivors. When the police could not locate Ann on that October afternoon, Wade and his grandmother rode back to Adel where his grandparents lived, and Wade told me he's been there ever since. He enrolled in school in Adel and went on to take care of his grandparents in later years and is a husband, father, and hardworking citizen of Adel, Georgia. I would like to think his mother's work ethic lives on in him, knowing that she worked hard to provide for herself and her son. And even after all these years of not having answers or closure, Wade still has a twinkle in his eye and maybe has more courage and tenacity than the average person. As I contemplated this case in my mind, I went back to 9th Street and stood peering into the empty lot where the cool house with the infamous yellow brick wall used to be. I thought, ironically, the house has vanished, just like Ann. But even though the house is gone and Ann is not here, her memory lives on in her family members. Wade shared with me an amazing tattoo that I want to share with all of you that he has of his mother. It has such intricate details. It truly captures the beauty of who she was in such a talented way. Ann Elizabeth Taylor Dorminey will always be remembered. Thank you all for being here today and for spreading awareness on this mysterious case. I want to thank Wade and Jim again for allowing me to highlight their mother and sister's story and for trusting me with this delicate subject that I know is gut-wrenching to say the least. It is time for Ann's case to be solved and for her memory to be honored. That's all I have for you today. I do welcome your thoughts and opinions on this. It is so intriguing to me, and I'm curious to see what all of you think about this case, if you've even heard about this case. Thank you all for joining me today. Until next time, Crime Babes, stay safe and stay vigilant.